Okay, if you're here, I think we're going to go ahead and get started and pick up again with our next presenter, who's Junghyung Kim. He's a graduate of the Graduate Theological Union here where CTNS is, so it's great to be seeing him again. He is currently an associate professor of philosophy of religion at Yonsei University in South Korea. So I think we'll give it just a couple more seconds here to get people back in, but. Thanks for taking part in the discussion, Junghyun. Take it away.
Okay, I prepared some slides. Can you see it? Hello, everyone. And I give special thanks to Bob Braden and CTNS folks for arranging this special event. And considering the time differences between Asia and Berkeley, it must have been a very difficult work. Personally, I feel very happy to be part of this conference. Meanwhile, I inform you that a revised version of my paper has been uploaded to the Google Drive last week. So if any of you have downloaded my paper prior to July 7th, you need to revisit the drive for the revised draft. I'm very sorry for any inconvenience. And today, my presentation will be based on the new version. And the title of my paper is Artificial Intelligence and the Sustainable Future of Co-Creation. Here, the last word co-creation may be phrased as co-evolution, or I'm thinking of cultural evolution. The overall theme is concerned with the future of cultural evolution in the age of AI, or the future of AI-aided, AI-powered cultural evolution. So this is a short version of my abstract. I would like to read it. Today's world is being shaped to a large extent by the wide-ranging infiltration of artificial intelligence into the entire Earth system, as well as our human society. However, due to the narrow focus on human-centered interests, discourses on AI tend to overlook or underestimate the intricacies and subtleties surrounding the AI ecosystem. In light of this situation, I aim to introduce a broader and deeper planetary perspective that encompasses more than just human AI interactions. From this perspective, suggestions for the future of cultural evolution will be made. And as you can see the screen, the main body consists of 7 sections. And those 7 sections can be divided into 3 parts. The first 2 sections deal with the limitations of human-centered discussions on AI. And then the following 2 sections develop a broader, what I would call post-anthropocentric and planetary perspective on human AI interactions. And the final 3 sections contain my suggestions for the future of AI-driven cultural evolution. Now I will briefly discuss each part in turn. In the first part, I note the narrow focus on human interests in the dominant discourses on AI. With this regard, I refer firstly to the utopian or dystopian vision of the future in such prominent figures as Nick Bostrom, Yuval Harari, James Barrett, and Ray Kurzweil. And secondly, I refer to ethical discourses regarding AI for humanity. And thirdly, and finally, to philosophical discussions on the ontological status of AI in comparison with the human person. My concern with these discourses is that their human-centered interests prioritize a particular group of individuals over the majority of the human population and non-human creatures, or overlook the intrinsic value of non-human entities, including AI, or divert our attention from a comprehensive ontology, which addresses the subtleties and intricacies surrounding AI and human interactions. Given the prevailing human-centered focus in AI discourses, I have suspicions that the great chain of being myths, the myth of great chain of being underlie them. According to this myth, as you know, which has long served as a classical explanation for humanity's place in the universe, there exists a hierarchical order of beings with gods and angels at the top, followed by humans, animals, plants, and minerals in turn. This hierarchical structure implies that humans are inferior to supernatural beings, but superior to all other mundane creatures. In this way, the myth represents a prevalent form of anthropocentrism, human exceptionalism, and the ideology of human supremacy. Even though this hierarchical worldview, with its anthropocentric biases, has faced severe criticisms over the past few centuries, it still seems to have a strong presence in the present discussions on AI. So the second part is considering the limitations of human-centered perspectives and the obsolescence of anthropocentric biases. I believe that discussions on cultural evolution must transcend the narrow confines of human history. Hence, in the second part, I argued that a broader perspective that incorporates no less than the planetary system as the very field in which human-AI interactions unfold is postulated. In this vein, I suggest developing a post-anthropocentric understanding of cultural evolution from a planetary perspective. My point is that over the past hundreds of years, the evolutionary, ecological, and planetary perspectives or studies have effectively challenged Aristotle's essentialist biology, which has traditionally served as a theoretical foundation for the hierarchical order of beings. I think these perspectives are not only strongly supported by recent scientific and meta-scientific theories, but also provide us with a new perspective from which the meaning and significance of human culture, particularly emerging technologies like AI, can be reappreciated. Similar to human beings themselves, I believe human culture in general and AI in particular are revealed as integral parts of the natural system, and therefore always entangled in the symbiotic and symbiotic processes within the Earth system. This perspective opens up a new way to transcend the narrow focus on human-AI interactions by bringing into our view the tripartite relationships between human nature, human culture, and the Earth system. Here, I dedicated several paragraphs to the exposition of the tripartite relationships. Briefly speaking, those three parties, human nature, human culture, and the Earth system, are redescribed in terms of entanglement, symbiosis, and symbiosis, which means making together or shaping each one another. In this respect, human nature is revealed as always already technologically textured. Thus, humans are defined as techno-human, techno-sapiens, or natural-born cyborg. Likewise, the advent of a new geological era called Anthropocene demonstrates that the Earth system as a whole is already technologically permeated. Thus, I would like to call the Earth system a techno nature. So after having explicated the tripartite relationships between human nature, human culture, and the Earth system, in terms of their symbiotic and symbiotic entanglement, in the third last part, I present three distinct yet interconnected proposals. And first of all, I argue that the tripartite relationships entails that the sustainability of the planetary system should be considered a limiting condition of AI-driven cultural evolution. Hence, I argue for sustainable AI. Meanwhile, regarding sustainable issues, including the current climate crisis, I think relying solely on new technologies like AI would be self-defeating. The presumption that humans on their own can and must solve all the problems related to sustainability is not helpful at all, but in fact harmful, I think. Instead, humans are advised to humbly acknowledge the inherent limitations of their own capacities, even with the assistance of technologies like AI, while respecting the planetary boundaries and the resilience capacities of the Earth system itself. This is my first suggestion. And next, I note that humans are in the symbiotic and symbiotic interactions, not only with their creations like AI, but also with the non-human companions within the Earth system, including electricity, natural resources, and greenhouse gases. Moreover, these non-human companions are understood as relatively independent actors with their own capacities. Given that even AI-aided, AI-powered humanity is just one of numerous actors entangled in the intricate networks constituting the Earth system, I believe what is expected from humanity cannot be complete control over the whole system. Instead, humanity needs to cultivate responsibility, an ability to properly and prudently respond to spontaneous and unpredictable, uncontrollable actions and reactions from all other human and non-human companions. Well, I would say the best role of humanity would be that of a facilitator, seeking a greater resonance among diverse members of the Earth system, while preserving and even empowering their respective capacities. And finally, despite the two fundamental restraints on cultural evolution, I told them in the first two suggestions, namely planetary boundaries and the unpredictable non-human reactions, I believe it is still possible for AI-powered civilization to have a profound impact on the entire Earth system and its inhabitants, as suggested by the concept of the Anthropocene. Besides, the future of technology remains uncertain, for the trajectory of AI developments is heavily dependent upon human aspirations and ethical political decisions. This is my conviction. So I'm sure that I believe that technical feasibility alone cannot and should not determine our future. Hence, my third and final suggestion is this: the increasing influence of human AI collaborations on the entire planet and its inhabitants entails humanity's greater responsibility rather than humanity's intrinsic superiority, whereas the underdetermination of the future by technical feasibility postulates humanity's ethical and political interventions for purpose-driven technological development. And the last phrase come from Dr. Son Hachal. Yeah. And this is the end of my brief presentation. Thanks for your attention.
Rachel, yeah.
Hi, good to see you. Thanks so much for your paper. I really love your framework, and I just wondered if you had some thoughts about what it would look like in practice to implement these principles and thoughts, because the paper is very broad and I get that it needs to be, but I'm excited about it. I want to know, what would it look like? Who has responsibility to work these principles into their engagements with AI? Are you thinking everybody from government to tech companies to teachers trying to implement them? Do some people have more responsibility than others? How would we go about making sure this shift can actually be implemented?
Oh, yeah, I think this is a very good question and difficult question for me to answer right now, and I'm still struggling to find out or in how in practical ways I can implement these ideas in our society in the global system. And I think you can help me to figure it out. So or we can collaborate together to find ways. Thank you, but I'm sorry for having no different answers. Yeah.
No, I just wondered, do you already see it happening in any space, or it's really?
There are emerging discourses on sustainable AI. So you can, if you go to Google and search sustainable AI, so you can find several articles and institutions and websites. So I find some hopes in there. So I want to join and empower their initiatives. So I want to be part of them.
Susan.
Thank you for this paper. I really enjoyed it. I liked the different ideas that you were kind of weaving together, and I got a lot of the sort of science, technology, society literature kind of coming through, and the take you have on sustainability I found really interesting. So my question, I don't know if it's a question, maybe a thought I just want to hear your reflections on is, so I really like this idea of responsibility. So having to respond kind of in the moment as these things are these new dilemmas and questions we're confronted with them, right? Because it does a nice job of acknowledging that we don't just have control over these things. We can't determine how they're going to unfold in the future, right? AI and other technologies are kind of redefining human identities and other concepts at the same time as we're trying to find a stable foundation to work from. But I guess when I'm thinking about this idea of responsibility, I feel like I still have this question then of, so when we do respond to these things as they arise, kind of, it seems like it's this focus very much on, well, we need to be centered in the present, and maybe kind of focus our efforts there, as opposed to what I think when people normally talk about sort of sustainable technologies, they're thinking very much with this kind of future-oriented approach, right? So like, what would it mean to develop a technology that's still aligned with human civilization 50 years from now? Because maybe there was like parts towards the end of the paper where you were suggesting, it's our vision for a desirable future that could help us inform what those responses are then in the moment. But like, how do we balance this tension between, trying to figure out what that desirable future looks like when that identity might change in the process of these things being redefined? And so it seems like we're maybe stuck with this puzzle still about what kinds of values or norms should be guiding our responsibility. Are we really going to try and still center, present norms and values that we have, or should we still be trying to incorporate and give some weight to a future that we think will happen? Yeah, I guess just trying to think like with that time question and how these things play out. I was curious to hear your thoughts about that.
I think your question makes me think more deeply about my ideas, and I think this is a very good question and time question. And I'm thinking more of the present rather than the future. So I majored in systematic theology, and I was influenced by William Moltmann and Wolfgang Vandenberg's eschatological theology. So for me, hope is very important in my own articulation of ethics. But the eschatological future is not a lie in the far future. It's near future, impending future. So when I talk about desirable future, it's not about 50 years later or 10 or centuries later. It's just impending future. And when I think of desirable future, actually I was thinking of this just as a sustainable Earth system. And so we continue to preserve and to help flourish the Earth system. And I think this is the most desirable goal, I think, and which I can share with non-Christians as well. And so the point is that enjoying this life, abundant ecosystem right now and responding to each other. That's what I am suggesting in this paper. I'm not suggesting for the long-term future. And so we need to focus on the present. And I'm thinking of a kind of orchestra. And so we are playing instruments, and we need to respond to other instruments. And so if we want to make a harmony, we need to focus right now to the present voices or present sounds. And this is important, I think. So something like Ray Kurzweil or Nick Bostrom think of envisions of future of intelligence field universe. I like that, but it's a long-term future, and it overlooks the existing populations. So there are only a few can enjoy in that space trip, something like that. So my concern is more in the present and existing creatures, existing population.
No, thank you for your paper. It got me thinking in a lot of different directions. So I'm gonna dump several ideas on you. Don't feel like you need to respond to them all right now, but pick maybe one or maybe two things. But I would love to continue this conversation beyond the conference. So let me just lay out a couple different thoughts. One, I'm working on a separate writing project not related to the grant at all about de-extinction and how I think that it's the epitome of anthropocentrism. So we could talk about that another time. I'm curious about when you talked about Imago Dei and anthropocentrism, you didn't talk about Oliver Putz or Joshua Moritz, and I'm curious whether you feel that their approaches handle the question of the issue of anthropocentrism better than the other authors you mentioned. Let's see. The next thing is that on page 5, you talked about our relationship and our coevolutionary interaction with non-human actors such as predators, fruits, fire, tools, and changing climates. And it struck me that, to me, those seem very different, particularly in the relationship that we have with them or the role that we have co-evolved. So I was wondering if you might be able to unpack some of the similarities or differences amongst those categories, maybe why those were chosen, or I think again, a lot we could discuss there. And then finally, it's more of a fundamental sort of underlying question that you talk about nature culture, and that what we create isn't necessarily that separate from nature itself, but then you still want to talk about hybridity, you want to talk about techno-humans, techno-sapiens, and cyborgs. And I wonder, are you trying to have your cake and eat it too by trying to reduce the distinction between technology and nature, and then yet still saying that there's something separate about them in the sense that we can have a hybrid? Because I think that if you take culture and nature to be closely related, then evolutionarily speaking, hybridity is going to be natural in a sense. So just some disparate thoughts about the thought-provoking paper you gave us.
Oh, okay. Thank you for your interesting comments and questions. And I think I can answer two questions about the different categories. I intentionally put those categories. So I didn't want to integrate them into one category. I wanted to emphasize there are diverse categories of beings and with which we are interacting with. We need to open our eyes to different beings or organizations or countries or even climate change or systems or something like that. So we are in interactions with all different sorts of beings or entities. We need to respect all these beings in their own capacities. That's what I wanted to argue for. And the Imago Dei or anthropocentrism, I read your paper on Braden. You wrote a paper on Imago Dei and artificial intelligence, right? And if I'm correct, you are expanding the concept of Imago Dei to non-human beings, right?
In that paper, I was sort of using the classic Christian interpretations of what that means, and then asking whether or not we can map those onto an understanding of AI.
Yeah.
So, but I think that in some ways, I think that Oliver and Joshua's work do a better job of trying to say
Mm.
there's nothing specifically better about what it means to be human, that the Imago Dei character that characterizes, and that can actually be applied to other species. So I think I'm just curious. You didn't mention them. I just didn't know if you
I
agreed with
like the
that.
ideas actually, and I am personally working on this project, Imago Dei, and my definition of Imago Dei is more relational and functional rather than substantial. And I borrow from Philip Heflin's concept of creator, co-creator, but that's more focused on humans. And Heflin emphasizes human freedom and in distinction from other creatures. But I want to expand the concept to non-human creatures as well. So I prefer the phrase co-created co-creators, and this is my term anyway. So in theological speaking, I prefer the concept of mediated creation or indirect creation. God is always creating something by means of other creatures. So there is no direct creations. So in that sense, we humans are creatures created by God, but in co-creation with other creatures. God made us in collaboration with other creatures, something like that. And this applies to not only to humans, but to other creatures as well. So all creatures are co-created beings, and also they are participating in creating other creatures as well. That's why I want to call all creatures as co-created co-creators, co-creators. I'm very sorry about that. And that's my idea of Imago Dei. And if I understand, I define Imago Dei in that sense, I think we can overcome anthropocentric definition of Imago Dei.
Great. Yeah, I'd say let's continue to talk about that. I think that'd be a really interesting conversation. But let's move on for now. Wolchun-sun.
Well, I kind of understand why, I mean, the different approach, not anthropocentric approach, but more, open approach that you suggest. I see the value in that, although I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't know what's the big problem of anthropocentrism after all, but anyway, but the thing is here is whether that approach helps what to do in the future from our point of view to acknowledge. I mean, I'm anthropocentric person, but I'm not saying I can control the weather, right? Or saying I can control the future, or I don't say that I can take responsibility for entire universe or even the earth, even for my household. So, being anthropocentric does not mean that, we take all the responsibility. There are certain limits. The problem is that we cannot do otherwise. Having, escaping from anthropocentric view does not change anything that I should do or I could do. So when you, probably one could agree that, anthropocentric perspective should be changed. Okay, but whether that helps us to develop more sustainable AI or, to prepare for a better future or make us more responsible, I'm not sure. You know what I mean? I mean, there's a matter of attitude and matter of practical, solution. How good solution we can make.
Okay, thank you. Actually, we have been discussing this issue for several months, and I'm happy to continue this conversation here. And in the paper, I actually refer to anthropocentrism, and in one sense, I accept that phrase, and the anthropocentrism need to be redefined as emphasis on human responsibility. And then I can accept that. So in a sense, I still believe that humans have some special place in the universe, in the Earth system, especially today. So I'm not, in that sense, I'm not totally against anthropocentrism. But when I talk, when I argue for post-anthropocentrism or something like that, I'm especially thinking of some anthropocentric biases which prevent us from opening our eyes to see the planetary system or the ecosystem or the broader perspective. I just wanted to tackle those issues. So many times I just use the anthropocentric biases instead of anthropocentrism. That's why. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Levi.
Okay, sorry. Oh, there's my voice. So I'm just this is just a comment, suggestion, I guess. And I hope the next presenter doesn't mind. I heard his paper isn't going to be very interesting, so don't worry too much. I don't think he'll be too offended. I really like the work you're doing. I think I notice you cite a lot of the work of Bruno Latour, and so I have two suggestions I think that might strengthen your paper. Actually, strengthen some of the stuff you're talking about in an interesting way. One, both of them come from the same book, so here's an easy recommendation. We Have Never Been Modern. That's the title of the book. We Have Never Been Modern. And in this, two ideas I think will be useful for a lot of the stuff you're talking about. The first is what he calls the so-called modern constitution. And according to Latour, this is the notion that humanity is distinct from nature. And he goes into a lot of detail about what this all entails. But his overall thesis is that there's never really been this distinction between humanity, human society, and nature. And so this idea, the modern constitution, we've said it, we've iterated it, we've taught it, but it's never really been the case. And so that's why his book is called We Have Never Been Modern. The second thing he does is he talks about at the these two twin notions. One is quasi-subjects and the other is quasi-objects. So he talks about non-human beings as being quasi-subjects. We treat them as subjects, although we do not recognize them as having the same agency as human beings. And quasi-objects, we treat human beings occasionally as objects. When we study them with psychology and social sciences, we look at human beings as though they are some objective thing that we can study. So we also treat ourselves as not fully independent, rational, autonomous beings. So I think these two concepts merge well with some of your broader discussions about Gaiaism and his approach there. And I think if this is just a suggestion, right, for the publication, you can bring them in and easily strengthen your argument by really appealing to actor network theory as grounding a lot of what you're talking about.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. This is great suggestion. I will incorporate into my in revise draft. Thank you. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Junghyung. We're going to move on to our next presenter. And if you couldn't tell from Levi's comments, that actually is Levi, so he was being a little self-deprecating there. Levi and I were both in the ethics program at the GTU together, so his PhD is from the GTU as well. Levi is currently assistant professor of religion and philosophy at Hong Kong Baptist University, and he's also associate director for the Center for Applied Ethics. He also recently started leading an Asian-based discussion group on social and ethical issues in AI for the Dicastery for Culture and Education, and recently organized an international conference in Hong Kong on ethical issues in AI. Take it away, Levi.
Thank you, Braden. So some of you know me from one of or another of those things that Braden just mentioned. My presentation today will be a version of a book that I have forthcoming. And so I'm hoping to produce this as an article. And so the broader arguments, I appreciate, any sort of feedback. Can you guys see my screen? I just realized, no, okay, let's try
Yeah,
this.
it stopped sharing.
So yeah, any feedback is appreciated. And I realize my written paper, some of my thoughts are scattered. So any specific comments about organization and so forth is also especially appreciated. So to begin with, the questions, that we were sent from Braden and CTNS generally, the one I wanted to address was this question: can AI assist humans in the acquisition of virtue? And I think this question is interesting. I think, though, it presents a number of methodological and grammatical questions about what do we actually mean by this question itself. So we might say use, right? Does AI have this function in its use function to help us develop virtue? Can we appropriate it in a way that will help us on our path to virtue? Another question, another element of this is, what do we mean by virtue? Here, of course, you can really get stuck in the weeds, because you have people, of course, who think that virtue is universal, that it's the same for all people in all places. And you have people who talk about virtue as being contingent upon one's culture, one's historical moment. And so there's a lot, depending on how we answer either of these questions or how we conceive of this question itself, yields a lot of different answers. And I think the breadth of the different types of papers we see in this conference help to really make this a strong point. But I want to reconfigure this to say, well, rather, how will it affect our moral action? And I think that's in many ways even more general, of course, but I think it helps us to take a step back. And my assumption is to begin, this is based on work I've been doing for a while, that all technologies by their nature change the moral landscape. And this is not to say that they make it better or worse necessarily, but to say that they change our moral possibilities. They change what good and bad means in a specific context. And I'll give you just two examples of this. This idea is sort of alluded by Bruno Latour in his essay, Where Are the Missing Masses? But the development of nuclear weapons, as a very extreme example, leads to the development in the Catholic theological realm of acceptable pacifism. Now, pacifism had been sort of on the table, but not really considered seriously for centuries. But once nuclear arms were prevalent, then the hierarchy, the magisterium said that pacifism was a morally licit position one could take. One could be a conscientious objector in a war. Another example, this is one that's much more personal to me, is that as medical technologies, diagnostic technologies for pregnancy, for example, develop, it leads to important questions that potential parents have about how to have children, when to schedule C-sections if that's necessary, what sort of care the expectant mother needs. These sort of things aren't only made possible by certain technological developments. So they change our moral landscape. I think this is just an important thing to say. So AI will change this, and it's not necessarily good or bad by itself, but we should note then that means it's not morally neutral. Many people think of a tool as just being something that we can pick up and use, and it doesn't have any greater effect. And so to say it's not morally neutral is not to say that it's good or bad again, but it is to say that it changes things. Important in this is that people do appropriate it or approach it as a question of being a morally neutral thing. They see it as something that will augment their power. And so you see many actors, both private sector, government, military, and so forth, working on, engaged in this sort of AI race to see who will become the most powerful, because they believe that there's going to be winners and losers. And so not only, of course, we see large tech companies like Google, Facebook, Tesla, Amazon, and so forth, trying to gain AI dominance, but also governments, including the United States, China, South Korea, and even specific sectors of these governments, such as China's National Natural Sciences Foundation, or DARPA in the United States, funding a lot of AI projects. And so this question of winners and losers, it assumes answers already to this question of what AI does and what it's functioning. And I think we need to bracket that and put it on pause. Because I think it's actually a very unimaginative approach to say that there are going to be winners and losers with AI. I think it's more interesting to say, to step back and say, what's going on here? I think more importantly than the question of power struggles is the ideological struggle. It's not how is this going to augment the power that I already have, but what is the ideology that's being promulgated here? So when we say that AI is intelligent, and that I, of course, stands for intelligence, it assumes that what the machine does is intelligence. And so there's a sort of circular reasoning that goes on here. AI is artificial intelligence. Well, what does it do? What it does is intelligence. And so what intelligence is what the machine does, and so forth. But of course, intelligence itself is a very fraught concept. There are different ways of questioning, articulating, measuring, demonstrating intelligence. And we know that even just the breadth of normal education, we have different subjects that some students succeed in and excel in, and other students struggle with, and not everybody is good at all of them. So this is important to note, that intelligence itself is something that there's a lot of debate about what it means. But it's also important to note that intelligence has long been correlated with moral goodness. And you see this in the philosophical and theological traditions where people say, example, Immanuel Kant says that that what is good is what is rational. Or where John Stuart Mill says that it is better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. Or where Thomas Aquinas says that we are made in the image of God by virtue of our rationality. And so there's this notion that pervades a lot of Western philosophical and theological discourse. And of course, it's also prevalent in Eastern traditions such as Confucianism, that being intelligent is somehow connected, correlated, synonymous with, depending on how you want to look at it, with being good. And so to say that the machine is intelligent is in some way to give it some sort of moral standing. Now, this is a problem, right? Because then if we talk about AI as being intelligent, then we start getting into the questions of rights and human rights and whether or not it can be a good or it's bad, rather than asking about its development, how it changes the moral landscape. when we talk about AI, narrow artificial intelligence, we avoid some of these big problems of general artificial intelligence because we don't assume that it is conscious the way that you and I are conscious. But it still includes this notion of intelligence as some specific action that human beings do, which other beings do not do. So it still has this notion of human singularity, human excellence as being the same thing as intelligence. Now, according to Kathy O'Neill, algorithms are opinions embedded in mathematics. And so this is the important problem. If we assume that AI is intelligent, we're missing the fact that AI is essentially opinions embedded in mathematics. Bias underwrites all AI research and it appears as objective. So we know many examples. Timnit Gebru and Joy Bulwani have demonstrated, for example, facial recognition programs show lower rates of confidence identifying Black men or Black women, especially compared to white men. We know that the way that predpol works, for example, tends to reinforce biases about where crime is happening. And all of this stuff gives biases that people have, biases in the way that programs and data is fed into the machines, but just gives them this polish of looking like they're objective because it comes from the machine, and we assume the machine is objective. The assumptions underwriting AI researchers then end up getting this normative power because if you assume, for example, that crime is happening in low income, especially predominantly Black neighborhoods in the United States, and predpol shows that crime is going to happen there and the police do arrest people there, then it really gives this appearance that it's an objective fact. And so the machine gives normative power. What is articulated through the assumptions of AI researchers is articulated as a social fact. In turn, I think then that divergent positions will be marginalized, and those who disagree or those who have different positions and views are at risk. And this becomes really concerning to me then when it comes to human beings who do not have the same sort of epistemological biases or epistemological frameworks as those who are making AI. So it's a reality that intelligence has has a long trace in eugenics. When we talk about IQ, the IQ test has its history in trying to demonstrate that people of color or people of certain ethnic backgrounds and women are inferior. And this has led to really horrific things, including the Virginia Sterilization Act, which allowed for over 7,000 people in the middle of the 20th century to be sterilized due to so-called idiocy or imbecility or other things for the good of the health of society. So this is not something that is just a long way away. This is something that ended in the 1970s. And so it's something that we should still have on our mind, that when we talk about intelligence, we have to be wary about who is left out. Neurodivergence is often derogated into this day in slurs and stigmas. We have a lot of terms that still have this very negative connotation. Just use a very simple one, psycho. We say somebody is psycho. We're implying that there's something wrong with this person and that having psychosis self is a bad thing. So we're derogating neurodivergence. And then, of course, there are non-hegemonic perspectives that are not neurodivergent, like ethnic minorities, the poor, cultural others, all of whom may not have the same perspective, epistemological framework as those who are working in AI, and they are, my concern is that they are dehumanized. My argument is that they are dehumanized. But at the same time, we may know that there are good so-called divergent views in the hegemony. These people, of course, include artists, mystics, philosophers whose views are different. But because they're part of the hegemony, they're included as sort of eccentric others. They're not derogated, they're not punished. But those who fall out of this framework will not be so lucky. So this is, I'm running up to the end here. My proposition here in the end then is that four things. The first one is that the term AI itself, artificial intelligence, we just need to get rid of this term. It's not good to refer to the machine learning. Even machine learning is a difficult concept because learning implies some sort of consciousness. But to call what is going on with these sophisticated algorithms intelligence is just reinforcing these biases. And rather, we need to look for other terms that will do the job. The AMA recommended calling it augmented intelligence. It still emphasizes intelligence as normative. I think calling it automated instruments, if we want to use AI still as the term, automated instruments may help us to get rid of some of the baggage that has been, that AI has sort of surreptitiously brought into its ideological framework. It also needs to be good for the people who are working other than AI guys. There's all this conversation about people being displaced by AI. And this needs to be part of the conversation front and center. If it's only going to benefit those who are working on AI, those who are investing in AI, government agents, then it's not a good project. The project itself should be oriented towards those who are potentially losing jobs. Maybe it should be used to augment their work rather than replace them. And I think we see this, for example, with radiologists. Radiologists haven't been replaced by sophisticated algorithms. They can use them to improve their accuracy, but they haven't been replaced. And I think this is a good trajectory for other work. I think it would be good for us to have useless AIs that don't have use function, that way we can't just correlate intelligence and goodness with being useful. I don't think that's going to happen though, but it would be good to have AIs that are deliberately slow or deliberately wrong or deliberately inaccurate. And that would be a good way to sort of throw off this notion that it's all, everything is coming up roses with AI. And above all, though, must make room for divergent intelligences. And I think this is the final word. Whatever happens with AI, we need to make sure that it's not just replicating and reinforcing certain epistemological biases that look like the people who are working in Silicon Valley. Thank you.
Thanks, Levi. Susan.
Oh boy, so I really enjoyed this paper. So I have two things. One I think is hopefully a friendly suggestion. So when you were citing Gebru and Bender about the sort of eugenicist underpinnings of AI, I realized there's another paper that I think is really nicely aligned with some of the things you're arguing here. It's by Stephen Cave and Conta de Hall, and it's called The Whiteness of AI. And, they similarly are questioning this idea of like, well, what do we actually call intelligence, and who is it modeled after, and who's being included or excluded by this definition? And they're particularly looking at this kind of racialized framing that we have for this and how it excludes marginalized groups. And, AI is kind of working towards this white utopia that excludes people of color. So it seemed to resonate with some of the concerns that you outlined here. And then, so for the question that I have, yeah, so I mean, I'm definitely on like in agreement and on board with your concerns about the way intelligence has this sort of elevated status, and then what are the sort of implications of that. But I'd also be curious then to think about AI once it has some kind of form, like especially with robotics, and also seeing how you could extend this proposal to think about concerns of physicality and embodiment, right? So how do we also see this hegemony play out in terms of voices that are chosen for voice interfaces, or body shapes or skin colors that are chosen when we, have some kind of robotic form? Because I think you see a lot of parallels between what's happening with the concerns about intelligence, and then also how we exclude, like, right, they're typically able-bodied, and they typically have like, in terms of how we design and develop them, it seems like we favor like female gender norms, right? So like you have tons of voice assistants like Alexa and Siri that are female voices based on studies that people respond to those better. And yet it seems like there's this kind of masculine gender norm that's favored when it comes to envisioning AI, or like holding it in this kind of high esteem of like what we think it is, and like this kind of rationality and this view of like the man and the Enlightenment, like this kind of view of and so it's weird to see that the both, I'm curious what you would think about the kind of physical embodiment questions, but then also maybe these like differences in how we envision AI, but then also why does it look different sometimes when we play it out? And it almost seems like, I feel like you touch on this when you bring up Eubanks, and how, look, well, when we deploy AI, you would think that it gets reserved for people who are very privileged, but actually the testing ground initially is marginalized communities, because if it goes wrong, people want it to go wrong there, and those people to be the ones that suffer the sort of harms of that. And so there's like some intricacies here that I'm just really interested in. Sorry for the ramble, but I'm very interested in the paper.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. So first of all, thank you for the recommendation. I'll look into that. And as I said, I'm especially interested in developing this. So I greatly appreciate that. Your question about embodiment, I think this is important because this connects to another paper that I started working on, then I kind of abandoned because I got interested in other things. But now it brings me back to this, which is the question of gender expression in robotic ideology, right? Because part of the problem with AI is like it doesn't need to be embodied in any particular body. So often it is sort of made into this, it reinforces this sort of gender normativity where the masculine is the disembodied. And so it replicates masculine notions of rationality insofar as it's disembodied. But when we put it into a machine, robotic form, then if the robotic form is agender in terms of the way it's actually constructed, it tends to be masculinized. You see like the Terminator series, where the skeletal structures are just, there's nothing there, but they all look like men when they've got flesh on. When they are articulated as feminine, then tertiary and secondary sex traits are highly emphasized. So what's going on is a lot of fantasy. And so this sort of like, when AI is put into a body and that body is female, it often has this sexualized component. And so you see that like some of the early work done on looking at AI and its function in robotics ties into sex bots and what's going on with people's development of this. And a lot of it is just pure fantasy. It's what the AI researchers think of as being their best, their most ideal partner. And so there's an element to it where when it doesn't have to look like anybody, I make it in my image. But when it has to look like somebody, it looks like somebody I want to have some relationship. And there's a really fascinating element to this, which is that when it's when it tends to be created in a masculine function, there is what Isaac Asimov called the Frankenstein complex, where we're afraid that it's going to overthrow us with like Terminator and so forth. But this hasn't been articulated the same way, I think, which is unfortunate. When it's put in a female body, we don't. There's not as much emphasis on this strange sexualization. And so the research I was doing, I was looking, if we have a Frankenstein complex, that son is going to kill me, right? This sort of fits into the Oedipal, Freudian Oedipal notion. And so the opposite should be sort of a Lolita complex, this notion that that my child is going to try to sleep with me or something like that. So or vice versa, right? There's a lot of this is really weird fantasy. So you get a picture of the AI researchers' minds when you look at what their ideas are. But it does really emphasize these gender norms, and it does emphasize traditional concepts of beauty, traditional concepts of gender expression. This notion that to be a woman is to have physical traits, or to be a man is to be disembodied and to be purely rational, whatever that means. So this is very strongly an element that pervades as well. And so this is I mean, something I'm very much attentive to. I don't know if I can work this into the paper, but it is something I'm very attentive to. And your last point about AI being tested in marginalized communities, yeah, this is something yeah, it's very disturbing, because those who are going to be the guinea pigs are the ones uh, who don't have much say. So this leads to the question of choice and how we sort of reinforce uh, impose our assumptions on other people, or our vision of the future on other people.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out a couple things because again, your paper got me thinking in a million directions. So I'm happy to talk later, and don't feel like you need to respond to everything. I'll try and keep it brief as I can. First thing, yeah, I think that Christianity hasn't taken on board seriously enough the notion of evolution and what it does to our understanding of human nature. And I think that similarly to what Junghyung was saying, that even secular transhumanists and futurists have this view of the great chain of being where intelligence is at the top, and the singularity is going to be the pinnacle of that. And there are certainly issues that problems that come up with that kind of approach. I don't remember whether you were at the Berkeley conference for Ted and Cyrus Olson's paper, but I think they would be of interest to you. Cyrus Olson wrote a paper with a radiologist about virtue and how in the emergency room the relationship between AI and doctor can be especially helpful. And then Ted sort of asked, is intelligence what we really want to say as Christians as being the defining point of human nature? Or do we want to talk about, love as maybe a better way of looking at things? Let's see, what else did I have? Yeah, I think for me, coming initially from bioethics, I think you're going to have to wade into some really touchy subjects about PGD and selective abortion, particularly around folks like Down syndrome, in terms of people who aren't being viewed as important or human enough to be born. And I don't want to get into that hotbed of a subject, but I think given the position you're taking, I imagine that you'll have to spend some time exploring that. And then finally, I think that you get caught up in a little bit in your own worldview concern when you talk about people being replaced job-wise. So for instance, let me see if I get the quote here. Page 14, you say, AI can potentially improve safety and working conditions in construction and factories, but what is the point of displacing millions of laborers with a machine? Well, that assumes, one, that human labor is a good and necessity that sort of upholds our capitalistic society. So I think, do we have to envision a future in which that kind of labor is essential to what it means to be human? I think it's just a question we can ask. But the reason that came to me was because I feel like you also do that with leisure, sort of saying that if AI is the best to go, or it can create beautiful paintings, then are we out of even our leisure activities? And I think that puts even a competitive view on leisure. And I like to win games as well, but is that the point of all of those activities? And I think I get hung up on, do I do this art well? And is that really the point of doing the art? So, Not a big pushback, but a little pushback there.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thank you, Braden. So I'll look into Ted's and Cyrus Olson's papers from the conference. I haven't I didn't unfortunately get to see them. Um yeah, I think you're right about this question of intelligence and the problem that we just and evolution that we just sort of assume that we've evolved to be the most pinnacle. Uh and I do in my book I actually address a little bit more the question of selective abortion and this reality that Iceland is almost has almost eliminated Down syndrome from its society. Of course, Iceland is very small as a country, but still, that's very troubling to hear that. That this is the future they want or that they think is appropriate. Um, and so yeah, so I think those are I'm with you completely on those. The question of replacing human labor, I think it's a very complicated one because the reality is that like when we look at the economic situation the people who are saying AI is going to make us all rich, they are not realizing that what happens in a capitalistic society is that workers generate value for the capitalists and that the workers have to feed their money back into the system in order for that capital to grow. There's this sort of gap that emerges because the value of the labor is alienated in Marxist terms, right? Alienated from the workers and they're paid less than the value of their labor. And that's necessary so that you can have capital, you can have profit. But what ends up happening, of course, in global capitalism is that we offshore a lot of that labor into other countries so that instead of people working in the United States in factories, take steel, for example, because Hachel is here, he lives in Pohang. Steel was really big in your hometown, Braden, of Pittsburgh until the 1970s, where it moved to Hachel's hometown of Pohang. And Pohang Steel Company became the largest steel company in the world. And now the largest steel company in the world is in China because Korean labor is too expensive to steel. So this is necessary. Labor markets have to migrate to cheaper, ever cheaper places in order for capital to remain high. There's a debt that is sort of amassing. If you get rid of the laborers, the whole thing collapses, right? This is why we have the gig economy. It's a way to try to keep this from collapsing. So I'm not unsympathetic to this, but I am, maybe this will hasten, maybe this will like pull the legs out from under the house on stilts. But it is sort of if we want things to continue, if the AI guys, if the Elon Musk and all of the ultra billionaires want their money to increase, they do need laborers, and they can't just make AI do the work because AI doesn't spend any money, doesn't return money to the economy. The question of leisure, I think you're right. I mean, we don't play games only to win, and I have to tell my daughter this because she gets upset when she loses. But it does sort of reframe it, right? So like when AI art was becoming really big a year ago, and people were like, wow, it can do everything. It sort of then makes people think the point of art is to do whatever AI art is doing. And so there has to be really strong efforts to push back against that and to say, look, that's not the point of art. In fact, there's a whole modern art movement that says, we don't know what the point of art is. So stop trying to say you think you know what it is. So I think the risk is to say, I mean, there is a risk to say that this is the point of leisure. But AI sort of helps facilitate that or helps push us in that direction, which I think we also need to be careful about. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I just want to be cognizant of the time so we can incorporate the general discussion, and I want to make sure that we get to Rachel's great question in the chat. So let's go Suraj and then Junghyung, and then let's jump to the chat.
Yes, thanks a lot, Levi, for your paper. I enjoyed it a lot. I have two questions or comments. Firstly, you talked in your slide, in one of your slides, about algorithm being opinion encoded, embedded in mathematics. I think that's right, and I think that's true for all algorithms. And perhaps I sense that you try to argue from this point that since algorithms are opinions, they should not be trusted. Right? I don't know if that is your argument, but since all algorithms are, they are not facts from the beginning. They are just a procedure whereby we achieve some results. Looking at when we do our simple arithmetic in grade school, for example, those are algorithms. How to do multiplications or divisions. So I think shouldn't we look at algorithms being opinions in such a way that there can be some, good opinions, for example. That's what AI ethics is all about, I think. They're not facts, of course, because there is the logical division between what we ought to do and what we are, what things are in nature, and so on. So perhaps this is a request for you to elaborate more on that. That's the first point. And the second point, toward the end of your talk, you talk about, you are kind of proposing that perhaps we should have some kind of AI that is deliberately wrong. My thinking on that is that, well, AI is not perfect as it is right now. Even when the engineers, the computer scientists try to come up with a perfect AI, we see some mistakes all the time. They are unintentional. So AI can be wrong as it is right now. So and when they develop their systems in their labs, so to speak, I can imagine that they find all kinds of unintentionally wrong algorithms or bugs or whatever that they try to eliminate in any case. And another way of looking at your suggestion is that perhaps we could allow for deliberately wrong AI, but we must put a label on it. This AI cannot be trusted. Don't rely on it. Don't use it for any purpose other than for fun, for example. Is that actually what you are proposing in your paper?
So in my paper, I did specify that this, if we have an AI that we say that we program to be wrong or to be slow or inaccurate or whatever, should not be entrusted with important things. And I think generally speaking, we probably shouldn't entrust AI with too many things anyway. But I think yeah, it has to be carefully labeled. And I think part of the beauty of that is if we do make an AI that is intentionally wrong, we could say, look, no machine is perfect, and you can see, just look how ridiculous this machine is, right? But yes, you're very right about that. The first question you asked, I don't think it's wrong to. I don't think all opinions are wrong. I think that's important to say. Like we all operate on our opinions, and many times those work well for us. If we have opinions that people are good generally, then we will treat people in a positive way. If we have an opinion that that we need to raise our children in a way that helps them develop, as you mentioned in your talk, Suraj, certain things that we consider to be virtues, then hopefully that will help them develop in a good way. I don't think that's wrong. I think it's important, though, that we clarify what these opinions are, and that we don't just assume that the machines or we are operating independent of them. The problem is we approach this question as though it's an objective one, as though there is a universal answer that can easily or clearly be delineated. And I think that's where the problem emerges. So that's my concern. So when we see AI emerge and all of these big machines becoming heralded as the next big thing, there's a sort of assumption that whatever it's doing, it's correct. And we have to say, well, no, what it's doing is and here are the underlying opinions that are encoded into it. So that's my sort of bigger approach, my more positive approach, I guess, is that we can make an AI that is based on good opinions. We should just clearly be upfront of what those opinions are.
Junghyung?
Yeah. Thank you, Levi. I think I almost agree with your proposals, and my question relates to Rachel's. Actually, she posted a question in the chatting room, and that question is for me and you, both of us. And in this question, Rachel asks whether there is a tension between challenging anthropocentrism and challenging and racism and sexism, something like that. So for me personally, this is my answer to Rachel's question. Now, I'm thinking of the idea of preferential option for the poor or preferential option for the marginalized. I think when we think of the marginalized or the poor, I think we can include not only the sexually oppressed or racially oppressed, but also the climate refugee or those species in danger of extinction. So I think with this category, I think we can address not only the anthropocentrism, but also racism and sexism as well. And this is my answer. And here's my question to Levi. And so your paper is mostly focused on human societal issues, right? And I just wonder whether you have any idea to incorporate some ecological or planetary issues as well. So you wanna whether you wanna expand your insight to address climate crisis.
Yeah, I think it's not I think on one hand, it's not a separate issue because, of course, we're all interconnected in a way that what affects the climate affects all of us generally. I think the trust in AI to fix the climate, and you address this in your paper, Junghyung, and I was really glad to see that this notion that AI is going to solve climate change is just such a bad idea because we're dumping so much energy into developing AI that it's now amassing to more than we use in air transportation per year. So this whole idea is a sort of, there is that problem. I think what I'm focused on now, though, is I don't want to expand too much beyond this particular question because it's easy to try to address all of the problems that come up with AI. And there are a lot of problems, and they're very important to be addressed. And you're doing a good job, highlighting the problem of ecology. I'm worried that if I bring that in, that it will sort of distract unless I can figure out a good way to do that. And if you've got a suggestion, I'm happy to take it. But I can't see an easy way to make it fit into this issue. And this ties into Rachel's question as well, because I tend to be much more cynical about this. I think human beings generally have really a universal perspective. For the most part, I care for my family, my students, people I interact with. In a general sense, I might care for other people, but I don't really care for people living in Dalian in China the way that I care for other people in Hong Kong. And I don't really care for people living in Florida in the United States the way I care for people in Utah where my family lives. So I think an important question, part of this is exactly what you said, the preferential option for the poor. And in fact, my book is focused specifically on the perspective of poverty as a counter to this dominant hegemony, this hegemonic view of AI. I think then within the Catholic tradition, the notion of the option for the poor is to overcorrect for this tendency to favor the rich. And if we say, look, the rich are going to get theirs, it's the reality. They're the ones who pull all the strings, they pull all the levers, they're the ones with the cash in pocket. So if we prioritize the poor, we try to reorient our biases to those who are worst off, then we'll have a better organized society. So I think the emphasis, there's a lot of people who try to say post-humanism as a philosophy, post-human philosophers, not post-humanists who are just transhumanists going beyond that. But post-human philosophy says, well, look, humanism has tended to exclude a lot of people, so let's go beyond the human. And I think that tends to be a way of getting past those sticky and difficult conversations about how do we actually take into account that most of philosophy is very Eurocentric, very masculinist, and very bourgeois. How do we actually question and critique that perspective? If we say, well, we're going to go post-anthropocentric, well, what we're doing is we're just skipping a lot of different levels in order to make this claim of universality. So my position is that I think we tend to be biased, and I think maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think we tend to be biased, and I think if we're going to be biased, we ought to prioritize those who are the worst off, and let that be our bias, first of all. And I think then that actually brings in problems with ecology, because, and Pope Francis addresses very well in Laudato Si that those who are most harmed by the ecological crisis are those who are already worst off because of lack of access to clean water or food or adequate shelter or breathable air and so forth.
Did that get at your question, Rachel? Any further
Oh, yeah,
explication or anything?
Yeah, I do feel like it might be interesting to look at some work that does try to connect the two concerns. Because I actually I actually think there are good interactions that they can support. Your two approaches could actually support each other. So I have a friend working on the intersection between Black liberation theology and animal theology. Gina Ree Moore. I was just looking, but I don't think she's published anything, but she has a talk on animals, theology, and race, and just some interesting ideas in literature about how our treatment of animals and creation actually do feed back into the sort of historical narrative and treatment of Black people, and how addressing one can actually feed back into addressing the other. So those were the kind of, there is some interesting work on how they don't need to be in tension. Maybe they can, expanding our love and care can actually involve both, especially given the climate crisis, and there's such interconnected issues. Those were the sort of things I was thinking.
Yeah, and Levi,
yeah,
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there's some really good work that highlights that, right? Like general feminist, eco-feminist theology, right? That like Rosemary Edward Ruther, who thinks that the approach to dominating nature parallels the approach to dominating women, and that they're part of the same attitude. So that prioritizing, if we were really taking a feminist approach and talking about overthrowing patriarchy and resisting patriarchy, that also means resisting patriarchal attitudes towards nature. I don't disagree with it. I do tend to think, though, that this notion, like when we try to incorporate there, and so there's, I think this leads to the sort of question of what do we really mean by post-anthropocentric, because there are approaches that are just like, well, let's make all actors within the sphere equal, or there are approaches like sentientism, which is like, insofar as a being is sentient, it has moral rights, moral status, and that's just reinforcing these rationalist positions, because sentientism is based on a rationalist view of what humanity is. So I think if we're going to question anthropocentrism, we shouldn't just be reinforcing certain anthropocentric biases, especially if they're preserving hegemonic positions. And so that's sort of I think when it's done well, it's done well. And I think, though, there's a lot of people, like you see a lot of the conversation about granting AI rights today, and you end up seeing people like Timnit Gebru and Joy Bulwani and Emily Bender and Shannon Fowler and many others critiquing it as being just deeply bourgeois, white, masculine in terms of the way that it's articulated.
Yeah, just to push back, I was just about to hop in on that when you said that, but I just, a little pushback I have on that aspect is that I'm thinking, like, if Michael Walzer, like, if we're going to say that AI is going to take over work, it's probably going to take over dangerous work, dirty work, hard work, the kind of work we don't want to do, and it's those kinds of jobs that have often been kept people from being included in society. And so I think that if that is the kind of work that AI does take over, then I do think we need to at least reflect upon how are we valuing that AI and what kind of status are we giving it in light of the problems that we have created and not dealt with in the past. But yeah,
I
Hook
think
King, jump in after that. Yeah.
You're muted. I'll just say though, I think you're right though. But if it's done as a cost saving measure, right, to replace people, that leads to big problems. So that's the sort of, I would be happy with just saying let's use it as a way of giving everybody UBIs and cutting work. I have no problem with that. Young, you are unmuted, but we can't hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. The key issue at this moment among, I guess, the AI ethics is that, European Union guidance and even Stanford established human-centric AI research center, and also the European Union human-centric AI. I might confuse the human-centric or human-centered anyway. So how AI can live together with humanity is the issue at this moment. But the thing is, anthropocenic anti-humanism is still see the real situation in AI, in humanity and anthropology issue. So in other words, now we need, what is humanity is the key issue. How we can design or progress AI development in cooperation with humanity is the issue. At the same time, transhumanists and long-termists, they are pushing toward with AI technology to transhumanism, anti-humanism. So some, I think, ecological Anthropocene ethicists are really confusing at this moment. The issue is, what is humanity is the issue. But if they push it too far, anthropocentrism, I think Levi is already pointed out that a problem. So they really bypass the real issue we need right now to handle. So I think this is a big issue, but I like to add my question at this moment. But we have to talk about this.
Right. My dissertation at the GTU was about moral anthropology, and I tried publishing it. Never didn't really get anybody to bite it, but I think it is an important question. I think Junghyung's his paper gets at a lot of this sort of, when we call ourselves created co-creators or co-created co-creators, we sort of problematize and challenge this notion of where we stand in relation to everything else. There is this bad tendency that anthropocentrism tends to be anti-humanism insofar as it becomes short-term focus, right? That we talk about amassing wealth or pursuing, instead of dealing with the climate crisis, we're going to deal with AI, which means that we're sort of, diverting resources that may be more important in one area than another. And we're doing it in the name of preserving ourselves or something, but it's really self-destructive. There is definitely a big problem here. Recognize with humility our limitations, our position within the universe, our dependence on the natural world, our dependence on other human beings, the limitations of what we have available to us, and the limitations of our own knowledge.
I think the issue of Anthropocene is very, very important, and we have to take it. We have to consider it very much. But now we have an urgent issue: humanity versus AI. Now is the time more urgent in defining or reconsidering what is really humanity is, rather than just still vague kind of anthropocentrism or anti-humanism kind of discourse are still prevailing in ecological discourse. Of course, I also, argue for ecological theology, what I call eco-DAO. But at this moment, the more urgent issue is humanity versus AI. So anthropology is the key issue, I think.
Yeah, I think the challenge though is we have to be careful about not narrowly defining humanity.
Sure.
I think
yeah.
we've tried to define it for 3,000 plus years and we don't have an answer. And I think that's important that we don't have an answer. I think part of being human is trying to find the answer.
Of course, my position is, as you know, I'm from East Asian Confucian Taoism basis of understanding humanism. So much different from a Western stereotype understanding of humanity. Please understand that point.
Yeah, no, I think though that we're having this conversation demonstrates though that the answer is not closed for what human is, and I think that's important. I think that having the ability to continue questioning is an important part of that.
That is the importance of this conference, I guess.
Well, and I feel like that's maybe a thread that's gone through today's papers is this idea of being able to have those opinions that maybe are slightly not in the what's considered the majority or the predominant, and making sure that we continue to be able to do that. I think we're probably at a good stopping point for today. I have tried to put together papers that I think are relevant with each other. So I hope that that's come through in some of the conversation we've had today. But I think it's been a great conversation thus far, and looking forward to continue it tomorrow. So, okay, thanks those who are in the attendance there, and we'll see you tomorrow.